Thank you so much for coming out to tonight's screening. I'm so thrilled to introduce tonight's amazing panelists, so please join me in giving a huge welcome, starting with cast member who plays Austin Dennison, David Gyasi. You'll recognize him as Stuart from the series, Ato Essandoh. And she plays Idra in the series, Ali An. And everyone's favorite troublemaker in the show, Hal Weiler, played wonderfully by Rufus Sewell. And Keri Russell, who's an executive producer and plays Kate Weiler. And last but not least, please join me in welcoming creator, showrunner, and executive producer Debora Cahn. Firstly, Debora, I wanted to start with talking to you a little bit about the way in which you approached writing season 2, because what we're going to see in season 2 for everybody, you actually originally envisioned as part of the storyline for season 1, but there wasn't enough space and enough episodes to be able to pack it in there. And so I was really interested in how you kind of worked to separate it out and really create it as its own entity for season 2.
It was really interesting figuring out in the first season kind of what the cadence of the storytelling was, because one of the things that was really important was that we tell every story from a lot of different perspectives. There's the State Department side, and there's the sort of more cowboy State Department side, and there's the CIA side, and then you get to the British side, and you also, you know, in a lot of shows, like the British side would be one guy. And we really wanted to broaden that out and make sure that we were really giving both sides multiple perspectives. And that meant that no plot could ever unfold. Because something would happen, and then by the time you went all the way around the friggin' block to get everybody's point of view on it, you just couldn't get through very much plot, which meant that when I was writing episode 7 last year, I was like, I'm not sure we're gonna fit all of this into episode 8, all of what I had planned. Not only didn't it fit into episode 8, it, like one of those sponges that they're dry and they're flat and you put them in water and then boop, that was season 2.
And for you, Keri, season 1 was so interesting in terms of watching Kate be in a place where she was very much outside her comfort zone, and she's someone who's incredibly adept, incredibly smart, but has frequently worked in spaces that have a lot of familiarity in terms of the process. And so coming into season 2, where she's learned a lot of the logistical elements, the interpersonal relationships, how did that change how you wanted to approach her for this season?
Yeah, I think you ironed out a few big kind of character ideas in the first season, so you could kind of let that go. And I think there was less setting up of the relationship, and it was already happening. And it allows you to kind of, well, in a way, be better at her job. You know, she just got to hit the ground running and get focused. And everything it does to the relationship too, because Hal has been hurt, and then how that can bring you together and make people less annoying.
For a while.
For a minute.
And for you, Rufus, in terms of the explosion at the end of season 1, you know, this isn't the first time that Hal has seen these sorts of things happen, but it's possibly the first time that he's been so central in it and been injured in the way that he is. And so how did you figure out how you felt like as a character he was going to respond to this situation that has something that he's witnessed before, but suddenly is touching him at an even closer degree?
I can't really speak for anyone else, but you know, the script is a really good guide, I have to say. I mean, everything that you need is there, really. And with these scripts, we can have, I mean, the wonderful thing about coming back to season 2 and to season 3 is that what ever is thrown at us, I think we all feel the same way, that the DNA that got us here is going to remain, and you can do anything to it. The more trouble that can be thrown at you, the more that changes, the better. And really, it was I don't think there's a lot of planning that needs to happen. It's the same with me and Keri. We read it and we just have an instinctive response, and it seems to work, you know.
Yeah. And Ali, in playing Idra, one of the things I think is so interesting about her is she has such a keen awareness of how she's perceived in the workplace, particularly as a woman in her position. You know, we saw a lot of that at play last season in her relationship with Stuart, and being very conscientious about, I'm not going to tell anybody about this relationship unless we are very certain about this. I'm not going to show my emotions in front of people, even though I'm feeling them. And so how has that created a lot of complexity in the character? Because you know the emotions are all there, but she has to really try to hold things close to her chest.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is always calibrating, am I showing enough? Am I, you know, because, and I think the tricky thing is that at the end of season 1, I think Idra feels really betrayed by Stuart, and I think she's ready to just dive back into work, but then the explosion, don't give me I mean, look at him. It's hard to resist. I think that, now you're distracting me. I think that once, you know, Stuart gets injured, and what's hard about it is that, like same in their marriage, it's like the things that you want to put away, it's harder to do because you're suddenly faced with the vulnerability and the fragility of life. And I think it forces her to sort of, she takes a few liberties that I don't think she normally would, because she's rattled by it, and I think it's harder to compartmentalize.
Yeah, and Otto, it feels like Stuart's very untethered at the beginning of season 2 as well. He's gone through this breakup. Mm-hmm. It wasn't his choice to break up, but it was his fault. It was his fault. And at the same time, there's the aftermath of the explosion for him, which does feel like something that he hasn't experienced before. And so in looking at how untethered he feels, how did you navigate that space differently for him?
Yeah, there's a reality that he has to face that he's never faced before, that Kate and Hal bring in, that they've experienced this thing. He's working at this Tiffany job, everything sort of goes according to plan, and then suddenly this real thing happens where he loses somebody who really means something to him, and he also gets hurt. So he's really in the trenches, he's really in the war for the first time, and he's never experienced this. And this is going to rattle anybody, especially somebody who's as, you know, put together and straight-laced as Stuart is.
Yeah. And David, I feel like with Jennison as well, kind of like very similar to Idra, he's very close to his chest with his emotions. He is the most British of them all, I think. But I love that then means when you make really tiny gestures, it means so much. You know, there's a moment in season 2 where, it's not a spoiler, he smiles. But for him to let out a giant smile is actually a huge show of emotion for him. And so have you had similar kind of calibrations for yourself in really figuring out the emotional landscape of a character like that?
What a lovely question. What a lovely moment that he smiles. I love that. That's a moment. It's so interesting to me that silence and that minimal movement and emotion in him, because my father was a very quiet man, and I had a job once where I was playing someone that came to England in '65. My father came in '64, so it gave me an opportunity to speak with him. And he shared with me reasons that explained to me his quietness and his stillness. And so I found in season 2, I said this yesterday and everyone went, I found a sadness come over me for Dennison. And everyone was like, what? But that's part of being an actor. We get to explore these extremities of human emotion. And my sadness was because I wanted Dennison to smile more. And I wanted him I wanted to be able to speak what was going on underneath. So when he does smile and when he does have those movements, what's behind that is really interesting to be in that skin.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to
I
watch.
don't know if that answered anything that you asked, but yeah.
Ali, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Idra's relationship with Kate because, you know, she kind of came at the beginning of season 1 with a healthy amount of skepticism. You know, who is this person? You know, are they just going to be here short term? Is she really going to end up being the VP of the United States of America? And it feels like they have a really beautiful relationship where Idra understands, like, this is someone who's on my side that I really trust. And we see a lot of that allyship at play throughout the second season. And so how did you and Keri want to play a little bit of a different dynamic looking at the growth that you built through season 1?
I mean, I feel like it's a pretty organic, I mean, Keri is such a wonderful human, so it's very easy. It's very easy to play trusting someone like that. But I think it was harder to be more at odds with her first season. But it just makes sense. You know, I said yesterday, it's like game recognizes game. I think it's 2 women who've been the only woman in the room for a long time, and I think that what's really cool is watching them recognize, oh, you understand how I've had to move through the world. And so there's an unspoken kind of familiarity and vocabulary that they share. And so it's really, I think it's really fun for them to get to collaborate with each other.
Yeah. Was that the same experience for you as well, Keri?
Yeah,
She hates me.
Yeah, I think it's really in the writing. I think maybe it was season 1, there was a little bit more in the writing of the friction between the 2, and I actually never saw it as like female to female at all from Kate's perspective. I actually think it was so just more direct, and I have a job to do. It has nothing to do with who you are. This is like my end point, and like do what I got to do or get out of the way. Like this is, and I think women can be tricky with each other, but I don't think Kate has any issue. I think she loves women and loves men, and I don't think she has like a problem with that at all. We've always talked about, you know, these women who are really in these worlds, like Samantha Power and, you know, the cool girls who are going out and like boozing it up with the Russian, you know, ambassador to whatever, doing vodka shots, but then also have really great girlfriends too. I think they're players on every scene.
Yeah, and Debora, when it comes to both, you know, friendships, working relationships, and even the romantic relationships in the show, these characters are all in this really intense bubble with each other, and they're also in a position where they really don't have time for lives outside, so everything that happens in this real ecosystem, and it kind of creates a little bit of a pressure cooker situation sometimes. So how does that influence and shape the way that you're writing the characters and the dynamics between them a lot of the time?
It's summer camp. So when you're at camp, everything is more intense and you fall in love and 2 days later it's over. And I think that when these people go to different countries, they're often in a place where they don't speak the language. There's sometimes a tremendous amount of danger. They can't really travel. All they have is each other and the sense of life and death stakes are all around them, and that's hot.
Totally.
My daughter's here, I just realized. What's your next question?
Rufus, in talking about Hal a little bit this season as well, I've heard you say that essentially you felt like he was already a very emotionally vulnerable character to you in season 1, and so you didn't necessarily feel like that changed, but there was a difference in the fact that he's now very physically vulnerable. You know, there's a moment where he can't tie his own shoelaces, and he does need Kate to help him, even though he'd prefer not to.
Yeah.
And so what did that open up in the character for you?
Yeah, as I've said, you know, the seeds of vulnerability are there right from the start. You know, they were at a place in their relationship in season 1 where, you know, there is a fear of loss that activates him, you know, and that runs all the way through it. And I was I wasn't playing that so much, but that was part of the DNA of it. And then something happens which, in one sense, brings her to him. But then it's like a kind of an intimation of a future situation. He's older than her. Suddenly it's kind of, he gets a sense of where they might be headed, and he's living in it in that moment, where she's being solicitous and looking after him, and he can't do things for himself, and something in that scares him, I think. There's so many things going on. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the writing, is you've got these things, and then you've got the opposite to play as well. You know?
And Keri, there's something interesting in watching Kate deal with the fact that she's kind of always envisioned Hal as someone who's indestructible, and she has to face the idea that maybe he's actually not. And so how did that change things a little bit for her, for you?
Yeah, it's so fun. I mean, the nature of this relationship that Debora has created is so fun, and it's something that we talk about a lot. I feel like, you know, from the first season, them, you know, fighting in the bushes to...
Not so much a fight, more of an attack.
to their most romantic moments, to, you know, them being hurt, one being hurt and then bringing the other back to... I mean, I really feel like they could be divorced and they would still... They're still the kind of couple that have that kind of energy that when they came into the same room, they will still have that energy. They could be with other people. It could be 5 years later, and they will still have that energy. And so that is the fun of...
And that's why I think we're not protective about any particular status to our relationship. Yeah, just throw it at us, like, you know, apart, together, other people, you know, that whatever problems they have, I think just, it's the DNA of it is still there.
Yeah.
And David, for you, you know...
After that? Sorry, go on.
I wanted to ask you about Denison's relationship with the Prime Minister, because, you know, they have quite a combative relationship, and it's someone that he both respects professionally but also disagrees with, and he's not someone who minces words when he disagrees with people as well, which is something very admirable about him. He's very forthright and very honest in his words. And so what was that like in going into this season? Because I feel like we see a lot more of the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Can I share a nugget about their backstory?
Yeah.
So it's wonderful working with Debora because she gives you these little gems and then goes, see ya. And this little gem was that they actually came through the political system like brothers. And that was so helpful because you can then play in scenes together with a level of love and connection, even though you may vehemently disagree with one another. So in answer to your question, it was nice to have that dance, and Rory Kinnear, what a dance partner to have. So a real kind of joy and challenge, because that man knows his lines.
It's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
So annoying.
It's unshakable.
Yeah.
We've tried.
Yeah.
I mean, Otto, there's something kind of fun in watching Stuart unleash everything and feel this just deep-seated anger, because Kate is someone that he ultimately respects hugely, and you know, he's become one of her biggest supporters and champions. But going into this season at the beginning, on the aftermath of the explosion, he's very angry and frustrated towards her. And so how was that a totally new dynamic that you got to create there?
Yeah, I think of the characters, I think that Stuart is the romantic. Stuart sees the city on the hill, and he doesn't realize that any city, no matter how perfect it is, has roaches and shit in it. And they bring it. They're I mean it as an insult, but they bring it. Their imperfect, perfect relationship is what, you know, meeting your heroes and then being disappointed in some ways makes you angry. But that's the real life, right? These are fallible people, and that's what he can't sort of like put together. He's also failed. He's also done things that are wrong, but he can't sort of like, he can't put his, he hasn't gotten to their level yet. And we have a great scene that she basically schools him. It sounds like, hey, little boy, that's not how you played it, but like, hey, grow up. These are things that you have to understand, and these are things that have to happen if you want that city on the hill. So you're either with me or you're against me. And I love the what Stuart learns, and that means he's getting to the next level of what he needs for what he wants to achieve in the world, I think. So it's...
One of my most favorite things about this show is, yes, it's about politics, and you've said it in this backtrack, but it's really about all the little versions of relationships within it. This relationship, that relationship, and the Stuart and Kate relationship I love so much, and Stuart in season 2 especially, what happens with Stuart is one of my favorite things of the whole season, because everyone knows, you relate to that. You relate to that person who's like, what is going on? This is not okay. And it's great. I love, that's one of my favorite parts of this season.
I think that's such a great point, though, that you bring up about the show is really about these interpersonal relationships.
Yes.
And, in terms of the way that you write it, Debora, it really tackles these incredibly big ideas and broad concepts, and, the politics in it is incredible in the writing. I definitely find myself rewinding scenes and going, what's happening now? Who's doing
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
But but there's so much intimacy in the relationships between these characters, and so many details in the subtext. And so when you write, how do you look at creating these really broad concepts, but actually ultimately focusing it on that?
I don't know anything about politics or the world at all that I haven't read about in service of writing a script at some point. When I first interviewed for the first show where I might write about politics, I Googled how a bill becomes a law. And then I watched the Schoolhouse Rock. So for me, the personal relationships are the way in, and I really enjoy just the teeny tiny weirdest things that animate personal relationships. And having now spoken to enough diplomats and people who really do this all the time, those little things are actually what's running the day, even in a room with, kings, warlords, presidents, prime ministers. Those little things are still alive there in the way that I think we like to imagine that they're not. Like somewhere else, somebody isn't thinking about their shoes. I was so excited to come out here, not just to see all of you, but because standing in these shoes was absolutely miserable. So, when somebody goes to meet the Queen, they are having that conversation with themselves in their head. They're not having some other more elevated conversation. And I think for me, the idea that the way that wars start and end revolve around conversations around which that sort of horrific humanity exists is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the beautiful things about your writing is that there's so much subtext in every single scene. And, I think people really respond to how dense a lot of the text and the monologues that you all have to learn are. But the silence is also just as key. When a character says okay and nothing else, that is a loaded okay. And so what has the experience been in working on the second season of this show and really getting attuned to the rhythms and those moments of denseness, but finding the beauty in the silence as well?
I love silent days.
Well, some of us, we trust each other, and we understand what the tone is now too. So, so we can just kind of fly. And you in your first season, you're sort of not sure, is this too fast? Is it too slow? And now we have a better gauge.
Yeah, it was too fast.
It was too fast. Yeah, we got the note.
One day we got the note from Debora, and she was like, slow the down. Do you know what I mean? But because the writing, it has such a motor in it.
Yeah.
And when you read the script, you're like, bam, 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 and all of these people think. But if you don't take the pause at the comma, let the period end the sentence, right? You're missing all of the goop that is what Debora is trying to show. And we started to figure that out halfway through.
But I will say my favorite lines are the ones where you just get the okay.
Yeah. That's the best. That's the best.
You've got a great okay.
David and Keri, I wanted to talk about the relationship and the feelings between Dennison and Kate, because I've heard that Debora gave you both a note in season 1 and said they should be the last 2 people to realize what's going on between them and kind of discover their feelings. And I was curious how that led to kind of like the slow burn, and just, again, it goes back to the subtext, because they never really were discussing their feelings, they were discussing world politics.
I don't know. I mean, if you have, I just think he's so many things that Hal is not. Like, that character is so, he just runs at a different rhythm altogether, and I think is obviously incredibly attractive. And you know, it's like the ultimate work crush, and you're in this heightened situation, and it's amazing. And then they're like, oh, also you have to fly to Paris with them. You know, it's amazing. It's the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I think ditto. It's that thing again, isn't it, of like, you know, all of these feelings inside, and then there's this whole thing with Dennison of what happens if he crosses that line. And we're talking about speaking to other people in the business, and what is the consequence of that. And that added to the sadness he had, because that I had for him, because I think, like, I just want him to live his life. I just want him to do that, to run with that connection that he feels. And I spoke to a friend of mine who went, I would be angry if you got with her. I was like, what? Why? As it, like, really meant a lot to her. And I suppose she was talking about this thing of, you know, especially people of colour and pioneers in these positions. I'm sorry, but if Obama has the history that Trump has, he never is your president. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. So then when you're representing these people, even as an actor, you're like, wow, that's a lot. But then there's this human bit of me, and I hope one day to be able to play characters where I can just... I was thinking about the Sidney Poitier slap, and I was thinking about how, did he have a moment where he said, this wouldn't happen in real life? But the slap happens and he slaps back, and there's a whole generation of people that look at that and go, wow. So I've segued. And now I'm back in the room with you. I am so fond of I'm so fond of working with this lady. I'm so fond of the relationship. I'm so fond that he has that in his belly. And it's so funny in season 2, because you can't just drop emotions like that. And I think that they're still there. So even though he's going, nope, this isn't, nope, it just is bubbling and festering. And that's quite nice to have.
Yeah. And Rufus, for you, what's the impact for Hal in terms of being aware of the feelings between the two of them? And do you think that he realistically believes that he will potentially ever lose Kate, or do you think he feels like she'll always come back to him?
I don't know. I mean, I think they've got an interesting history.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, there's a scene that it's clear that there have been little dalliances, and that the fabulous history that has been created for Hal is that he's tried, it just doesn't really work with other women, you know. And that actually the problems between them are not about that. If their relationship ultimately found us for good, it will not be because of a thing like that. But, you know, he's up to his tricks. As soon as he notices a bit of a thing, he says, oh, you know, you should fuck. Just like your mum saying, oh, you know, I've got someone for you. And that's a kind of canny way of trying to control it. So just close your eyes and think of me. You know? But that doesn't quite work. And then there's a thing, he thinks he's got it, he thinks he knows what it is, but then there's a different feeling to it. And you know when something, you know, when a jealous person suddenly feels jealous, it's because something has changed.
Yeah.
You know, and I think he is that guy. He's not like, why did you talk to that guy kind of man. But he's like, that bothers me.
Something's
And
up.
if that bothers me, then something's up. And I like it when he's unsettled, I have to say. It's good.
Fun.
Ali, there's something that you've spoken about previously in terms of Idra and some of the backstory that you thought about her early on, which is really looking at people who'd previously gone undercover in operations because you felt like that would have been her career path into where we see her now. And I was curious in some of the threads that you found in the research that you were doing and some of the details that we now see in her as a character because of that.
Well, I think stillness is a big thing, and it's something that I personally really had to work on first season, because one of the things that, and also even being in London, because obviously the culture is adjacent, but it's very different, and one of the big things is that if you just hold, people will often, in the discomfort of that silence, give you more information. So that was something I thought about a lot with Idra, was being able to just sit there and look at somebody and wait for them to give you something. So that's something I thought about. And I also just, I was really struck by it's really an act of service. You know, I mean, I think people think of it as, you know, being a spy, but you have to really be mission driven because it requires so much sacrifice and you're giving up. I mean, you know, as an actor, people say, well, you have to travel, you give up a lot of families, this kind of thing. But when you're a spy and you're living undercover, you literally can't even tell your parents where you're going. So and I think that's something that actually Idra and Stewart probably can connect on, is I think they fundamentally are both incredibly devoted to the country.
And Ato, there was a moment where Stewart was described as a kingmaker, and it's really interesting to think about the power that he sees as a character and as a person, because, you know, it's not about a physical power, but the ability that he has not only to kind of create this position for himself, but to really elevate other people and build them into potentially becoming the vice president is huge. And so how has that played into him in a big way for you?
Yeah, I always say that the kingmaker is not the king. And it reminds me of like what he must be as a person. He's like you just said, he's mission driven. He sees that city on the hill again, and he wants to put the right players there to make a perfect world. He sees her come in. She's got, you know, he can zhuzh it here, he can do this, but like who she is as a person is perfect. And so what I've been told a lot is that people who go for power are not the ones that you want in power. But when you see the person who clearly doesn't want power but has all the capabilities, that's who you want. And I feel like those kind of people, like the David Axelrods of the world, are incredible because they are good at sitting back and looking at that person who draws the crowd and molding that person into a great leader. And that's what he sees in Kate.
It's a wonderful point, and I feel like it's almost such an ethos of the show in looking at Kate's journey in terms of she doesn't want it, so she's actually perfect. And was that something that you were very conscious about in terms of a constant theme and looking at her and the characters around her, or was it something that just naturally came out of the storylines for you?
I think it was there. I think it was in the DNA of the show from the get-go, but I spent a lot of time thinking about who's good at campaigning and who's good at running things, and how those aren't always the same people. And you know, having watched that unfold in a bunch of ways in the last decade, I really wanted to get into the idea of what does it mean to be somebody who's that capable, and there's a way to talk them onto that stage, but what are you going to have to do to them in order to make them kind of camera ready?
And for you, Debora, and having worked on The West Wing and being so familiar, obviously, with and being so familiar with Allison's work on that show, I know that you had a little bit of apprehension, not in casting her, knowing that was the right choice, but in making sure that to audiences and to the story, it wasn't going to feel like a repetition or something that was just an extension of that. So how did you go into the writer's room and solve that challenge for yourself?
Oh, you're so kind. She knows the answer to the question, and it's not apprehension. It was absolute flop, sweat, terror. I was worried that it was going to feel like a gimmick. I was worried that it was going to be like, ooh, C.J. Craig grew up and was vice president. And I was worried about writing a character that would be distinct enough, particularly because a lot of the way that I write, I learned from writing for Allison. So there are certain things that I hear that kind of come from her rhythms. So those are in all of these characters. So I just didn't want it to feel like sort of all the same thing. And then I was just scared to write for her. I mean, I went into a full-on immobilized panic for a number of weeks when the first big Allison episode was coming, because it just felt like so much was riding on it, and I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be good for her, and I wanted it to be kind of worthy of these guys in terms of what she brought to the table. I didn't want it to be a stunt that was like, oh, look, and now it's Allison Janney. Like, I wanted it to be a good part of the story for all of these characters. And so, yeah, it was pretty stressful.
But it's turned out amazingly.
Yeah, it has.
You know, and Keri, in terms of this continued journey and consideration of being groomed for VP, I feel like Kate has to really think about the public-facing side of herself in a way that she's never had to consider. She's always been very adept at blending in, because that's been a requirement of the work that she's done for so long, and now she's being asked to put herself out there. And, you know, even just seeing her give a speech is not a natural space of comfort, but she's starting to try to figure it out and figure out how to bring her personality and her sense of humor into it. And so what's been your experience in finding that continued push and pull as she kind of goes a little bit more front-facing?
Yeah, because they're two separate jobs. I mean, the person who's a wonderful public speaker is not your best workhorse at home, you know, running staff and making the important stuff happen. I mean, they're two very different things. I think circumstance in the series plot points help push, you know, her into thinking, well, I want someone good in that position, so maybe I can do it. But I also think there is this natural ego thing where everyone does sort of get wooed by power. There's a moment that it's alluring, you know. It's everyone thinks, well, maybe I could do it, you know. And I think power is alluring, and I think there will probably be a moment that it's alluring, but I think the core of that character will be the core of that character.
And for both of you as well, because, you know, there's so much in that scene discussing Kate's outward appearance and the double standard of what the expectation is. There's been so many great costume details for Kate over the series. You know, we learned in season 1 why she always wears dark colors, because she stains her clothes. She's wearing a paper clip on her zipper when she meets Allison Janney's character for the first time. And so how did you want to slightly adjust some of the elements of costume for her as a character with this in mind?
What, you I don't know, you talk and then I'll talk, I don't know.
Our poor costume designers. They're like, is she gonna wear a color on this episode? No, no, she's not. So it was very frustrating for them, but wonderful for us to be able to kind of create this world where there's a very limited palette. There's sort of a uniform that everybody wears to work every day. And as soon as you've kind of taught the show that that's what the world is, little incremental changes can have these seismic impacts. So that was really fun. It was like the moment when we had to go from black to gray, and which gray, and was that gray too light and that would feel too cheerful? I mean, it's forensic.
Or like even the red dress. I was on a, I can't remember exactly what happened. You can help me remember. I was on a plane, and this flight attendant came up and said, I watched that whole scene. I binged the whole thing, and he said, in that moment you came out with that red dress. I was like, yes, bitch. I texted you instantly. So then it counts when you do it. But I mean, her clothes and all that. I love all of that. It is true. We are, 3 years in, and I still wear the same black suit. Mm-hmm. I change my shirt color sometimes. Yeah. But I wear the same black suit, and gosh darn it, I love it. And it makes you think about. You are free to think about other things, And I think maybe men have this more than women get to have. I love dressing up too. I love all of those things and the power of clothes and fashion and all of that. But when you have a uniform, especially, you're not spending mental time thinking about anything else other than what you want to focus on, and that there's a real freedom in that, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And Rufus, I mean, you've talked frequently about how you feel like Hal is Kate's biggest champion in all of this. I mean, he knew that she was being considered for this pick before she even did.
But he was one of the people behind it.
Yeah, but that he doesn't necessarily always know how to support in the right way. But it's interesting to see him really trying and kind of like figuring out these little dynamics and these plays of, well, Kate used to do this thing for me, so I'll do that for her. And so how did you want him to be maybe a little bit better at it, but still be fallible at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, I think what's important is he's trying, and I love him failing. I mean,
so good.
The idea that, he really thinks that he can sing backup, because that's what she did for him, and he's the wrong shape for it. Somehow he just like, oh, sorry, did I try to? I'll be back here. That one of the things that makes him Hal is he makes these incredibly brave, daring plays that, when they pay off, are spectacular. But there is always the risk that they won't, and most of the time they do. And he will take the initiative and do things that no one else would think of doing. When they go wrong, they can make a mess, and that's one of the bones of contention between them, about the fact that that's the cost of doing business. You got to try, and I feel for him, but it doesn't mean it's not his fault. Sometimes he's fallible, but I think he is someone that he is quite a brutal fighter for what he believes is good. He is someone who actually has, in a sense, a killer instinct in order to do something that he believes. They really want to help. They want to do good things for a huge amount of people. And he has a thing in him that he's prepared to stick the knife in sometimes to do that. So he's a bit of a warrior in that way. And I think that makes him quite an exciting character, but quite dangerous too sometimes.
Ali, in terms of the writing, I remember in season 1 hearing you say that one of the things that really struck you in the scripts is you're playing these characters who are sitting around having these very intense conversations, and at the same time there's still always a sense of humor in the writing and to who they are. And I wanted to just ask about the importance and what that really gives you as an actor in terms of just that gallows humor that you get to intermix with all the other tones.
I mean, it's the best part. It's so fun. It's so fun. And also, I mean, this cast is also deliciously funny, but I think we live for those moments, and it's the same thing what Deb was speaking about, that when you're going to meet the Queen and you're worried about your shoes, I think that speaks to who they are. Everything they're doing is high stakes, but it's also completely normal to them, So I do think that the only way through some of this intensity of what they're dealing with is humor, and I think what's so beautiful about the writing is that each of the characters expresses that humor in a really different way.
I saw you nodding a lot, Ato.
Yeah.
Was that a similar experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you show up. I mean, first of all, everybody's a goofball. So like, even without the writing, you're laughing all the time on set. And so then when you see your fellow actors bring these moments to you, there's times where I've almost broken up scenes because I'm watching these two, or I'm watching all of this happen, and I can't. I'm caught out there watching the work happen, and I go, "This is so fucking good." And oh yeah, I got a line. So that's just me every day on set, basically.
David, in terms of Dennison's backstory as well, I feel like you were touching upon this a little bit before, but you've also spoken about feeling like his parents' background was a really crucial thing to him and really has made him the politician that he is, as someone who isn't just looking forward for policy that's going to affect a certain community, but really is effective across the board. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit about the journey and how you thought about that and how that shaped elements of him.
Yeah, so when we first met, there hadn't been a foreign secretary that was a person of colour. So it was a big thing to talk about and discuss. And before our show came on, there had been about 4. So that was a thing. But also around the time that we met, the Ukrainian war had kicked off, and we had a policy in our country which was homes for Ukrainians. So you would get paid £300 to house a Ukrainian asylum seeker or refugee. There was also another policy, a bill that they were trying to make law, which was to send other refugees to Rwanda. And these refugees look like me, or Ali, or brown-skinned people. And if you're a foreign secretary that looks like me, and you have to go in front of the audience and talk about these policies, that's a really interesting place to be. And so I kind of sit in that space a bit when I read Denison's lines, and I think, what does that feel like? So those little moments they mean a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, for all of you on the cast, you all did such extensive research, watching documentaries, reading books, meeting with real life counterparts to the positions that your characters held going into season 1. And, you know, with the experience of making season 2 and now going into season 3, has that continued, or do you feel like you're able to just focus specifically on the scripts instead?
Oh, we got it now. No, I'm kidding.
The writing is so good that we're like kind of entrenched, but one of the gifts of the show is, you know, now we're friends with the real ambassador, Jane Hartley.
Yeah.
We get to hang out with her and go to dinner with her, go to her house, dinners with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So it's we have been able. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. We happened to be filming at the embassy when he stopped by after a very important trip to China. And
I wasn't there that day. That was really hard.
Yeah. Like weirdly, no one from the CIA has contacted me.
So yeah.
There was a funny moment. We went to the 4th of July party at the ambassador's house, and it was like the Diplomat, right? Like there's tons of people, all kinds of diplomats. And I was talking to the DCM, my character, Matthew Palmer, this lovely guy who plays my part, basically. And so we're just talking, and people are going by with the wine, and then the ambassador from, let's say, Azerbaijan comes up as Jane Hartley walks by, and he goes, "Oh, I have to have a talk with you about the da-da-da-da." And they start to go into high-level conversations. And I'm going, "Are you guys doing the show?" And the guy's like, "Who's this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's the guy from the Diplomat." He's like, "Oh, I like your show." And then he goes right back into like this Trilak talk or whatever. And I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah. So funny."
I know.
Yeah.
So cool. So cool.
I mean, that kind of makes me think a little bit of the way that you write for Kate and Hal and their relationship, because there's so much texture in every single scene, and they'll be completely embattled against one another, and then all of a sudden one of them's on the toilet while the other's brushing their teeth, and they're talking about policy, and then they're laughing, and then they're very intimate. And so how do you approach writing those scenes and really thinking about all the different directions you want to take it in?
It is reflective of my experience of life. It seems really normal to me. And I haven't figured out if it's just a normal thing that hasn't found its way very often to television, or if I just have a really bizarre life. But it feels, that's just the way that I experience things. It all happens at the same time. The most profound and the most absurd all happen at the same time. I just wanted to throw in a thought that I had when you were asking David the question about his parents. Children of immigrants are disproportionately represented in the Foreign Service and on this cast. Yeah. So I think that there's something. I mean, we know most people either who are diplomats in the US or the UK, but I think that there's something in both of those communities about what it means to come to a country from the outside and be able to recognize what is incredible about it and therefore want to protect it and turn it into its best self.
Yeah. You know, in talking a little bit more about Hal and Kate as well, I mean, the two of you play that dynamic so great, and I love how there's always so much rich history in everything they say to each other. And I feel like one of the scenes that audiences responded to the most in season 1 was the physical altercation where she's screaming, "You're killing me," in his face while trying to beat him up. And there is also another physical altercation between the two of them this season. And so what was that like to be able to kind of go back to that physical side and again just root every single thing, every single scene in so much history and emotion?
What's great is it's always kind of there. I mean, all of the things are all there at the same time. That could happen at any time. You know?
It's true.
It's just so much fun. And as Deb says, it's just, to me, it doesn't feel like a kind of a tone or a style of writing. It just feels really real. And I remember when the first season came out and people were like, "Oh, I don't think we've seen a couple like this before." Well, you might have been in a couple like this before. But like, because so many people respond to it just as being recognisably the life that they live. And I just love the ridiculousness but truthfulness of these things. That it's ridiculous but completely believable, as far as I'm concerned.
I love that. We have a couple of audience questions that were submitted that I wanted to get to. The first one is for you, Debora, from Carolyn Bortner, which is, did you always know that Hal would survive the bombing, or did you give any thought to killing the character off?
This gonna be good.
Hi, honey. The piece of the story that was, I guess you guys haven't seen it yet. Yeah. I don't want to do a spoiler thing. Anyhow, the piece of the story that was, for me, important is that I didn't want to, in representing a couple who work together and who work together about something that feels like very much like a mission, I didn't want to represent a relationship that fell apart over infidelity. Like, television has checked that box a bunch of times. And I am married. He's here. You know, we're still going, and it feels really great. But like, we've seen a lot of our friends not make it, not in their marriages, and it isn't because somebody went and fucked somebody. It's because, you know, they don't like the way the other person breathes. Or thinks, you know, the kind of things that can there's just a lot of things. It's really hard to live your life with another person, and it's really easy to let the relationship fall apart. So I wanted there to be the kind of wound in the relationship that is as big as the way that we've seen infidelity portrayed in so many movies and TV. And the idea that there are these situations, and the story came from real life, where diplomats make choices about how to behave in dangerous areas, and you know, sometimes they don't make it out alive, or sometimes the people who work for them and where they make decisions and a bunch of people follow, those people don't make it out alive. And they're like the parents of this embassy, like they're like the mayors of a small town. And the idea that somebody who trusts you, who believes in you, and in a lot of ways idealizes you, could be hurt based on things that you do that you think are going to help, you think are going to save the world. Well, maybe they do, and maybe they don't, and maybe not everybody gets out of there alive. And that the central idea of the season, is what happens to everybody when one of those terrible tragedies occurs. But any of you could be next.
Oh, we know.
You're going to have a slew of gift baskets arriving tomorrow. This next question is for both of you, Keri and Rufus. The relationship between Kate and Hal, the way that they're drawn to and rely on each other, the way they push and hurt each other, in lesser hands, it could have potentially read entirely toxic. But the nuance and complexities are so grounded and honest. Was that all on the page, or did you participate in crafting this relationship with the writer, with Debora, and, you know, going beyond just the brilliant performances?
It's so much on the page.
It's on the page.
Yeah.
In there. I mean, I think we both had the same reaction to it separately. We hadn't met each other. I read it and I thought, oh my God, just the scenes. And I know you felt the same way. Yeah. And I met you in makeup and went, hi, and I walked down there, oh, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it just was there. But it's the writing. And we have so much fun doing it.
We do.
I think we approach it the same way. But it was all there. And it's the thing that excited me is I could feel that in the writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's total bullshit. It is for every single one of you. The characters, the story, and the relationship has dramatically changed based on what you brought to the table, who the characters that you built were. I mean, like, you know, I'm involved, but that's what's been fun about this, and that's what's fun about doing TV that goes on and on and on, is you can sort of see what they bring and then write toward that.
Yeah, I think there's a beautiful theme amongst all of you, and nobody wanting to take credit and wanting to give it to everybody else. And lastly, for all of you on the cast, what is a particular scene or moment or character detail that you're proudest of in the show?
Wow.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's impossible.
I know.
Yeah.
You
Well, it's
almost,
a beautiful
you almost
moment
had
now, if you
something,
want to
Ali.
enjoy it.
Allie's ready.
Well, I mean this genuinely. When I watched season 2, I was so excited to watch Stuart kind of be unsettled and so I was just proud as a castmate to watch Ato's work. So.
And for any of the rest of you?
You can talk about me.
No. I'm trying to think of something. No.
You want me to tell you the scenes I'm in?
And the last one that we have is also for everyone. What's been your favorite location to shoot in?
Oh, jeez.
Scotland.
Scotland
was
fun.
amazing.
Well, I was gonna like wait and not say it because they haven't seen it.
Oh, would have been fun if we'd ever managed to get there.
But yes.
The trailer, it was just pointed out.
The trailer. Is SP in the trailer?
What?
SP?
St. Paul's Cathedral.
I was like, what's that? Is that the
Americans.
Yeah, no, but I was trying to.
He's talking in code and it worked.
Yeah.
Very effective joke.
So we film at this little church called St. Paul in London. And, that's it. Yeah. I mean,
No, Scotland.
the Louvre. It's really hard. It's really hard to say.
It's location porn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
We keep on dropping hints about where we like the story to, you know. Yeah.
Greece has come
Trouble
up.
in the
It's a
Maldives.
very important meeting we have to get to.
Well, you've all done such an incredible job in creating this show, and we appreciate you sharing it with us this evening. The second season is out October 31st. Cancel all your Halloween plans and stay home to binge watch it. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.